Welcome to the 4th and 4 podcast, sponsored by Inside the Leather Custom Putter Covers. Search Inside the Leather Shop on Etsy. Use promo code podcast to save 20% at checkout on your purchase. I'm Donald Lawrence. Our guest today is a legend in the strength and conditioning community. He has coached national champions at Tennessee, Miami, and LSU. Coach Tommy Moffitt, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me on, Donald. I'm excited about the opportunity to talk a little football today.
Let's do it, man. Most of the time you're talking strength and conditioning, and that's what encouraged me to reach out to you because I've been listening to the Moffitt Method. I know you just started that recently, so that's been fun. And what I like about your show, and a lot of them have a link to the NCAA strength and conditioning, but you have some high school guys on there as well. So I think I appreciate that, and I get a lot out of it.
Yeah, that was a major goal of ours, was to offer high school, collegiate, professional strength coaches, men, women, young coaches, seasoned vets, and to offer a variety because, and I'll admit it and say some of the best strength coaches that I've ever been around are high school strength coaches. I think high school strength coaches, because in college and NFL, you have a lot to do with the level of talent that your team has. And it doesn't matter what level you're coaching on. So most high schools, some recruit, some do a good job recruiting at that level too. But most of your high schools are made up of a lot of different type of players from different experience levels and maturation and everything. So I think the best coaching in all of sports is done at that level.
In your time, you have coached some absolute beasts, some really, really talented guys, 5-star guys that were going to get a shot in the NFL, whether they worked hard or not. What I'm interested in, give me a couple names of some guys throughout your career that made their NFL career in a 4 or 5 year Tommy Moffitt program.
Well, that's there's a lot to consider there because, over a 22-year span just at LSU. So spent 34 years coaching. In the last 22 years at LSU, we've had some incredible players. And it would be hard to name just a few. But the first guy that came to my mind when I thought about this was a tight end that we had my first year here. And although I didn't spend 4 or 5 years developing him, he was a player that when I got here, you could tell that he loved the weight room and that he spent his time in there with the old strength coach, and he did a phenomenal job while I was his strength coach. And then he had a great career in the NFL. His name is Robert Royal, and Robert was an undersized tight end, in 2000, and, teams were still playing then with 250 and 65-pound tight ends, and Robert did everything he could do to get his weight to 240. But then Robert had a really good NFL career. So he's the first guy that comes to mind. And then the next guy just retired from the NFL. He was on our 2003 national championship team and is actually the last person on our team to handle the football. And that was our punter, Donnie Jones. And who would have thought, that you would think of a punter when you think about strength and conditioning. But Donnie played football. He played safety at Catholic High School here in Baton Rouge, had a great high school strength and conditioning coach. And then when he came to LSU, he was a fanatic. In fact, when Donnie was a young player, I would get these random phone calls from him, and he would be in the weight room with another player or the strength coach and say, "Coach, tell them how much I power cleaned when I was there, Coach. Tell them I was a hard worker." And, so then there's guys like Craig Stouts, Travis Daniels, even Tyson Jackson, who I think played 9 or 10 years in the NFL, mountain of a man. Al Woods, is still plays, he plays in the middle of the defense, either a zero or, some form of a shaded nose tackle, just a mountain of a man, but somebody who relied on the weight room to give him that edge. And he's still the type of person that trains today than Joe Barksdale, Morris Claiborne, Michael Brockers, Kevin Mentor, Daniil Hunter, Tre'Davious White for the Buffalo Bills, DJ Chark, Russell Gage, and I can go on and on and on. And I've had to really think about it and think about it in my head and narrow that list down, because realistically, your football team, any great team, is made up of guys like this. The core, the critical mass of your team is made up of guys that are dedicated to the cause. They're fanatical workers in the weight room. They study their playbook. They go to class. You always have your superstars. The top 5% of guys that are just going to make these miraculous plays and be all pro and stuff. But the nucleus of every great team that I've ever coached had a group of guys that were, again, dedicated to the cause. They loved football. They were passionate about the weight room. They were smart enough to know that strength and conditioning gives you an edge over your opponents, and it lengthens your career. And then in worst case scenario, these guys know that if you get hurt, you're going to have a quicker recovery because of all the work that you've done, because people get hurt in football. It's a tough sport. But they're smart enough to understand that if I do this, and this, and I happen to get injured, I know that my recovery is going to be shorter and I'm going to bounce back quicker had I not done it. And the list of those guys, I could go on for days talking about those guys. And they're just gritty, tough guys that love the weight room and do a great job of leading the other group of guys that might not love it as much as they do. They bring everybody together. You spoke briefly about strength and conditioning. I think it's the greatest job in all of coaching, because you get to be around the players all the time and you see them at the very best, and then you see them at their very worst. And so it's been a blessing to having been able to do it as long as I have and work with guys like that.
One guy that sticks out in my mind is Austin Deculus. So he played offensive line at Size Fair, coach.
Woohoo, big Texas guy, yeah.
And I remember they would use him on the visitor sideline of JV games to hold the chain, kind of like the intimidation factor, right? Before the game the next night. And I was like, God, I want our parents to see what a Division I offensive lineman looks like.
Yeah. Austin.
I saw
Austin
him.
Was a great worker.
Yeah, because I saw him again. I had an opportunity to go to Texans training camp last year, and I was like, holy cow.
He's a mountain of a man.
Yes, he is. Yes, he is. Great kid, man. He was an outstanding player for us in this part of Houston.
Yeah, so when we were practicing for the semifinal game in 2019 against Oklahoma, we had a workout in the basement of our hotel because we brought a weight room to Atlanta with us. Because we knew if we won, we were going to have to play Oklahoma in another big game. So Austin and the old lineman had one of those workouts. It's the end of the season. You're preparing. You're out of town. You got this junky weight room that we threw together in the basement of the hotel. And it's kind of, it was kind of like Rocky, with Dolph Lundgren and Rocky, and the Take It Back episode where we're down there lifting weights, and it's Austin and Ed Ingram, Chasen Hines, Damian Lewis, Lloyd Cushenberry, and they're down there lifting and got all pumped up, and they took a picture of themselves, and Austin put it on Instagram or Twitter, and it blew up. And it was just like Austin when he was standing on the sidelines for the freshman or JV game. He is so massive, and all of those guys were so massive that I think it serves kind of the same purpose when y'all did it in high school. So yeah, commonalities there.
My first time hearing you speak was in 2010, and I've known from early in my career I wanted to make the jump to a coordinator and then be a head coach. And I knew that the 3 months in the season, that's its own deal, but the other 9 months, I've got to learn, I've got to master. And so I went to the 2010 Glazier Clinic, amongst other things I was doing, and didn't go into offensive lectures, didn't go into defensive lectures. I went and saw you speak, and that was life-changing to me. And I remember you talking about your boys and talking about your kids were young then, I think maybe fourth or fifth grade, and you were talking about broomsticks and getting in power position and them thinking it was toys and it was a game. And then as I continued, time went on, I remember seeing pictures of your boy cleaning in high school. I was like, wow, man, that's powerful stuff. And, you know, I'll never forget that as a young coach. And now you have the podcast, as we mentioned earlier. Why is it important to you to get out to these clinics, to have your podcast and share your knowledge with other coaches?
Yeah, well, my passion for strength and conditioning isn't something that I could just turn off at the end of the day or at the end of the season or, you know, the end of my career. There isn't a day that goes by that I'm not immersed in some part of the strength and conditioning culture and community. And it's as much a part of me as the color of my hair or my eyes. And so I love it. And you know, there's just something about strength and conditioning that I can't get away from. And I love it. And so what the Moffitt method has allowed me to do is to stay involved with the industry. And it gives me the opportunity to continue something that I've always done. And I've always been very open. I've always tried to help as many people as I possibly could in this career, whether it was trying to help someone better their program at a particular high school or a young coach that wanted to advance his career. And so the podcast gives us an opportunity to continue to do that and to teach and to guide and then also add value to our remote coaching app that we have developed. You know, that is a passion that I have. You know, whether I was coaching at John Curtis Christian School in New Orleans or the University of Miami or here at LSU, my reach was kind of, you know, the reach and the total number of people that I could engage in with on a daily basis was kind of limited because of my responsibilities at the university. But now, you know, my reach I can reach people as far west as Los Angeles and as far south as Miami and as far in the Northeast as I possibly can. And our goal is to deliver, you know, digitally a comprehensive 52-week yearly training program in speed, strength, conditioning, you know, plyos and the whole 9 yards. And it's to continue something again that I just can't turn off at night or in the morning. You know, I built myself this little office here in the spare bedroom in the house. And if you could see it, I'm surrounded by books and books. My wife's like, why are you reading that book again? You've read that book 10 times. And it's just something that I love. And I've still got a passion and energy to do it. And I'm going to keep doing it as long as I can.
So 2 things with that. You know, that was my next question. What is something you've listened to or read recently that's kind of impacted you or the way you think about things or the way you communicate or your leadership? And also, I'm not sure that's your office, Coach. Look back there. I think you're in somebody else's office.
Yeah, no, yeah. That's my guard dog right there. So, yeah, Booney. Yeah, that's my guard dog right there.
I wish my dog was disciplined enough to lay there through my podcast. She's wanting some food about 20 minutes in.
No, I tell you, he's looking out this window here. You let a car pull up. I was deep into a podcast one day with a guest, and we were talking about some thing in strength and conditioning, and somebody pulled up in the driveway, and he went nuts, and I jumped this high out of my chair. So, yeah, it's this really his office. Yeah, you're right. But no, so as far as reading a book or something that I've been doing lately, probably a book that I keep going back to, and it had a profound, and I didn't read it until just a couple of years ago, but it had a very profound effect on me. And I read it. I actually pre-purchased the book before it was released, and it was Jocko Willick's book, Extreme Ownership. And it was later in my career, and, after 34 years, you find yourself, or I found myself in the latter parts of my career reflecting on things that I had done in the past and making sure that I wasn't sticking to a particular program or exercise or method or means, because that I was just accustomed to doing it, And I read that book, and it had a profound effect on me, because, I don't know if you've read the book, but
I have.
It talks about taking ownership and being a leader, and, trying to get better, striving not to be satisfied with the status quo, and, to always deliver more than you promise. And when you make mistakes, you fess up to it. You don't have to publicly, especially when you're involved in a small business, but, you accept responsibility for things that don't go well. So that was Extreme Ownership is a book that I think should be fundamental reading to any coach or anybody that's involved in any form of team or organization. I think that is a phenomenal read. And then there's all kinds of other texts that have to do with, strength and conditioning and exercise phys, and, that I recommend to everybody, whether it's The Science and Practice of Strength Training by Zach Zarowski, or a series of books. There's 3 series in line, plus another book, but it's by Anatoly Bondarchuk. It's called The Transfer of Training, and it talks about, the book. And Anatoly Bondarchuk is obviously from the former Soviet bloc countries, and he was a track and field coach and scientist, and he did this long 20-year study on what exercises actually transferred positive and negative effects to the sport of track and field. And so for every event in track and field, he lists, and again, it's 20 years of research that they did, all of the different corresponding characteristics of all of these different tests and exercises and training modalities that had a positive or a negative effect, and then based on what part of your career is, and it's all broken down. So it's, it starts with an 11.2 or 11.4, for instance, in the 100 meters. The highest time I think they list is an 11.2 or 11.4, but then it goes all the way down to a 10 flat. And then it shows you all the different drills and and tests and exercises that those athletes did that had a positive correlation to the result in that particular event. And there's 3 books in that series plus another book that he wrote. I think is just incredible reading, because some exercises that we like in strength and conditioning, and if you're a collegiate strength coach and you look at this exercise, if that exercise doesn't have a positive effect on, like for instance, a shot putter, who's one of the most powerful men, an elite level shot putter. And some people think that I've read research where the most powerful event in all of sports is putting a shot, over 20 meters, which is 70 feet, so over 70 feet. So, yeah, the Anatoly Bondarchuk's Transfer Training are 3 books in a series that I think is fundamental for anyone to read.
I got the Jocko book after I heard him for the first time, right when I was getting into podcasts. I think it was Tim Ferriss 108, and he tells a story about Ramadi and just how intense. I was hooked on podcasts after that, and it's been great because the wonderful thing about podcasts and Audible books is you can train 2 things at once, right? You can train your brain while you're training your body. You can do it while you run, while you lift. Yeah. I'm a big reader too, but you can't run and lift while you read.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so once I kind of figured that out, man, it's been fun dabbling through different podcasts. And the Jocko podcast is one that you're actually cutting into my Jocko time, which is good though, because I needed to branch out. I was looking for something else. Every now and then I'll hit a Rogan just because he's the best, and he's got some interesting guys on there from time to time. And one thing I found with podcasts is I try to go to like 1.4 to kind of speed through it a little bit. It helps me run through them a little bit more.
Wow. Yeah.
And, so you can get one of those Rogan episodes that are 3 hours. You go to 1.4, 1.5, you cut it down to 2, saves you a little bit of time. One of the things that came out of COVID, and I like that you're mentioning your strength and conditioning books, man, is I dabbled into that because I knew when we came back, our training was going to be totally crazy as far as not being able to spot and everything. Read the triphasic method and just trying to get as many different ideas as possible to put the best possible plan together for our guys. I was at Pearland at that time. We had about 350 athletes that were coming back from basically not doing anything, and I read a lot about the NFL lockout that had happened a few years earlier and how training to get those guys back. And it was just a time to really grow and reflect if you used it.
Yeah, you're right. You're exactly right. There's now I've never heard of speeding it up. I guess that's why they have that feature. That's a pretty good idea, man. I think I might try that.
Try it. Yeah, once you get past 1.5, it gets a little crazy. It sounds like chipmunks. Yeah. But yeah, 1.4 is like the sweet spot.
Yeah, I might try that.
Eric Edwards is a 2017 state champion hurdler from the school I'm at now, which is Langham Creek High School in Houston. He weighed about 115 pounds, if you can believe it or not, when he won the state championship in 2017. He went to, I think, Oregon for a year and then comes to LSU. Unbelievable career, 5-time All-American, weighs about 155 pounds now. We have a track coach that he's pretty connected with. That's a strength and conditioning guy. Does a lot of CrossFit stuff that he still trains with when he comes into Houston. And what did you do to convince him to prioritize strength and conditioning, that weight room aspect, to get him to where he ended up in the LSU record books?
Yeah, well, every individual is different. And we paint with broad strokes, in our first initial conversations with every athlete that we encounter. And, our department here is, or was, close knit, and everyone worked together as a team. And the most important part was service. As a strength coach, you're in the service industry. And we are here for the athletes, or we were at LSU for the athletes. The athletes were not there for us. And it was our responsibility to make sure that we created an atmosphere and gave them the means to be the best that they could possibly be. Whether it was technologically with the different apparatuses that we had, equipment, barbells, the track and field. In fact, right before I left, over a 3 or 4 year period, really, we put a lot of effort into the track and field weight room, along with all the weight rooms at LSU. But, holistically, buy-in began long before. And this was a philosophy of ours, a department-wide philosophy. Buy-in and the process to get coaches and players and student athletes to buy into our program started during the recruiting process. When kids come on campus, we introduce them to our entire staffs. We toured the weight room. We showed them all of the amenities that we had at their disposal. We had everyone available to speak to them. We showed them, we did presentations, whether they were on the TV, of our technologies. We put actual weight room demonstrations on. We had examples of all of our former athletes' records that they had accomplished in the weight room. I mean, it was a big deal. And then we gave them copies of our program. Every sport had programming that we wanted those athletes to do prior to coming to Baton Rouge, and a great deal of buy-in and I'm talking about the entire department, began during the recruiting process. We wanted to be transparent, very open, and hard sell them on how critical it was that they began training now and not wait until they got to Baton Rouge. And then once they got into Baton Rouge, especially for those that did what they were supposed to do. And now, we used to always say when the recruiting process ends, the developmental process begins, and you go from the stroke of that pen on National Signing Day from being a high school student athlete to being a collegiate student athlete, because you signed that scholarship or those papers and committed yourself to being a part of something that's better than yourself. And then once those athletes got on campus, really all you had to do then was to plug them in to a very specific program. Even if, and there are guys that come into our program, whether it was Leonard Fournette or Patrick Peterson, and guys in baseball, Dylan Cruz, who is killing it right now for us on our baseball team. Those guys come in as freshmen, and they're first round draft picks. They're the Jamal Adams, Mr. President, Jamal Adams. And the list goes on and on of guys. Peyton Manning started as a freshman for the University of Tennessee because they're just that much better than everybody else. But the rest of that population, the rest of that team has to do their work in the weight room. So you plug them in, you put them in a place where they can succeed and gradually work themselves up. And really the culture takes care of it once they're on campus. The culture, the team culture, takes care of buy-in after that and drives intent. And because those athletes, male or female, they don't want to let their teammates down. They don't want to be that guy. They don't want to be that girl that lets the whole team down or their position group down. So, yeah, that's a major part of it. In fact, our signees, we caught from now. We were not allowed to contact them as a strength coach prior to them signing their scholarship. They could contact us, And the football coaches would put us on the phone with them during the recruiting process. But once they signed their NIL, their NLI, what National Letter of Intent, NLI, I got it mixed up with NIL. But once they sign that NLI, we're allowed to call them. And I mean, I had a notebook, and it had every player on there and their name, a photo of them, their position group, and every conversation that I had with them, I would write down notes. And then once I felt like I had gotten to know that young man, then I would pass that notebook to another member of my staff, and he would call him. And then we'd pass it on to another member of our staff. And based on his position, he would have a specific coach here. Then that coach would talk to him. So, you know, we tried to drive or forge a relationship for them with them before they got here, to make sure that when they got here, that developmental process was kick-started and got going immediately instead of just kind of trudging through it that first semester. Major part of developing a program and being successful and having young men gain 40 pounds in their collegiate career. Think about that, you know, and we had, you know, football players that gained 40 pounds and 40 pounds of functional mass, you know, and it didn't matter if it was male or female. Our female athletes trained like horses, man. It didn't matter what sport it is, man. Our women and men are some of the most dedicated athletes that I've ever been around in my life.
So there wasn't a day one, because the groundwork had already been laid as far as the expectations and what you're going to do. And that kind of brings me to the next thing. So 2 exciting things have recently happened in our district. And we have 12 high schools in our district, so a very large school district. And it's hard to please everybody, and academics come first. So a lot of the attendance and things are to balance out schools. But recently we got a 6th grade pre-athletic course where we're able to take kids, instead of being in gym, just regular gym, and expose them to different sports and weight training, you know, the foundations, maybe it's PVC pipes and milk crates at that point, right? And then we also, for the first time at our school, at Langham in a long time, we have a direct feeder. We're not splitting with someone else. So they are now our kids. And we need to skip day one. We don't want them coming in thinking this is day one and starting when we get them as freshmen. So let's think of the end in mind here. If you're going to have a high school football player, and let's talk football specific right now, what are the core lifts, the core exercises, the things that you should really focus on for a high school football player that's going to perform to the best of their ability?
Yeah, great question. So, and it really, you know, it doesn't matter, male, female, freshman, sophomore, junior, or senior. In all of our programming, football, baseball, basketball, there's every workout is going to consist of some form of movement prep, basic footwork, hip mobility, torso mobility, multi-planar, multi-joint type movement preparation, ankles, knees, hips, spine, shoulder, movement prep. That's fundamental. Every workout starts with that. And there is no part that is greater than the whole. Then there's almost every workout. If we're training if we're in the weight room 3 times a week, then there's some form of jumping that is going to be done twice a week. Either horizontal jumps twice a week, or horizontal jumps one day of the week, vertical jumps another time of the week, and at certain periods, some form of vertical jumping twice a week. And again, that's fundamental. Males, females, doesn't matter. Football, basketball. And then sprinting next. We're going to do some form of acceleration, 0 to say 20 yards, deceleration. So accelerate, decelerate, and then some form of change of direction work. At least once a week, year round, unless it's the competitive season. And then one time, and then sometimes twice a week. So some form of acceleration, deceleration, and change of direction twice a week. Generally Monday and Thursday. And then later on, we couple in some max velocity training too. And now, especially when you're coaching in high school, theoretically, max velocity isn't reached until like 30, 40, 50s, even for real sprinters, 60 yards. But some young men reach top speed at 20 yards. And that's the good thing about working in high school. If you can get somebody to prolong their acceleration until they can reach top speed further down the track, then you've done your job. Then there's always lifting, squatting, some form of squatting, back squat, front squat, overhead squat, or some form of single leg squat every day. So if we're training 3 days a week, there's some form of squatting, again, back squat, front squat, overhead squat, or single leg squat with the weights held overhead. An explosive exercise against resistance, and somewhere within 70, 80, 90% of their body weight, so like a clean, a snatch, or a jerk. Some form of a press, bench press, incline press, barbell press, and then exercises for the butt, back, and hamstring. So, I'm big into total body programming. I've never been one to do a 3 or 4 day split routine where you focus on the upper body one day and the lower body the next day, because the weight room would be the only time you would ever do that in sport ever. There's nothing about any form of athletics where you perform certain skills one day of the week with your upper body, and then the next day you perform skills with your lower body. Football might be broken up, run, pass, and teams, or offense and defense, and even by position, but there's nothing about the sport of football where it's upper body, lower body. Nothing. And so you shouldn't train like that. You don't use your biceps on one play and your hamstrings on another. Your body works as a functional unit, and you should develop it that way. So we start every workout with movement prep, some jumping, some sprinting at some point in that workout, and then we're going to do an explosive lift, some form of lower body development, some form of a press for upper body development, and then we're going to do some stuff for the butt, the back, and the hamstrings, which are critical. I call the mirror muscles. That's what you see when you look at yourself in the mirror. And then you have those other muscles that you can't see in the mirror, and that's your butt, back, and hamstring. And they're probably, especially at the collegiate level, they're probably more important than the mirror muscles. And it's just basic fundamental movements, very basic fundamental movements.
One of the things that's been really kind of a game changer for us, that things that eliminate space, right?
Yeah.
Especially when you're talking about in middle school, the Sornex glute ham developers, something like that would be a lot more functional than actually having full-size glute ham developers that we'd have at the high school. They can still kind of mimic the lift. They can use it on the core as well.
You're talking about go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay, yeah, the ones where you lay on your back and you put your heels in there, you pull them up to your butt on the 4 wheels.
Yeah, that's the Frankenhyper.
Yes.
Yeah.
Those are
Yeah. So the neat thing about barbell training and young men training young women, you can do 100 exercises with a barbell. Just right off the bat, I know 100 exercises you can do with a barbell. But a lot of machines, when I say machines, I'm not talking about power racks, but machines you can only do one exercise with. The Frankenhyper, you can do a few more exercises with Frankenhyper. But there's nothing better than a barbell. And then with dumbbells or kettlebells, you can do almost every exercise that you can do with a barbell, you can do with dumbbells, kettlebells, or those round kettlebells or whatever you call them. But yeah, so I'm very basic, man. And the younger you get, the more fundamental the movements become. You know, you go through a series of gymnastics and then throwing med balls, but then you still get back to jumping, squatting, pressing, sprinting, and exercises for the butt, back, and hamstrings. It's very basic, very fundamental. And then, in fact, it's pretty neat. So this book, this is the book I was telling you about, Bunderchuck's book, The Transfer of Training. This is the first volume. And it's, right here is the correlational interrelationship between preparatory results for the shot put. And it lists throwing the shot put, and then exercises like snatch, power clean, squat, bench press, standing long jump, standing triple jump, vertical jump, throwing a shot forward, throwing a shot backwards, and then running 30 meters. And it breaks it down for you. And it's just so basic and so fundamental. And this is for, 20 years of research of the top shot putters in the entire world. And it does that for the 100 meters, men and women. And it's very simple. It's so simple.
I like what you said earlier about teaching acceleration for as long as possible. At the Olympic level, they're still accelerating on the 100 meter. I think FloJo probably had the greatest 100 meter of all time where she was still accelerating. And I believe it was 88 Olympics. And that's one of the things we're trying to get our high school guys, right? That's the ultimate goal, is that we're still accelerating forward.
Acceleration, yeah. It takes a great deal of patience for somebody to be able to do that. You got to learn technique, but you also have to learn a lot of patience.
Right. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. That's one thing about teaching high school, and I have a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old. So my whole day is full of patience.
Yeah.
What groundwork would you put? You just went through a very comprehensive but doable plan for a high school athlete. What groundwork would you lay as early as 6th grade?
Yeah. Well, it would be very basic movement skills, skipping, hopping, jumping, somersaults, basic gymnastics, spinning, jumping, throwing med balls, catching, jumping, all types of jumping, sprinting, and then, exercises with, you mentioned it earlier, PVC pipes. I'm a huge believer in that. And, a lot of people are afraid to introduce the weightlifting exercises to young men and women, but they're not afraid to put a baseball bat in their hand or give them a golf club or, give them a shot or even have them, do flips on parallel bars and stuff. Why would you be cautious about introducing the weightlifting exercises? You wouldn't wait until an athlete reached puberty to teach them to swing a bat or to swing a golf club or, and I know this has fallen on deaf ears because you've heard this, and I've been preaching this my entire career. Strength and conditioning activities, and and I'm talking age appropriate, because sixth graders are not smaller versions of mature adults. There's a big, big, big difference. In fact, there's a greater difference in a 13-year-old and an 18-year-old than there is an 18-year-old and a 30-year-old. Because of the amount of growth that takes place in a young man or a young woman's body from the onset of puberty until puberty begins to wane around 18 years old. And some start earlier, but it's generally between 13 and 18 years old. You have this rapid increase in height and weight. Why not take advantage of that, and have a young man or a young lady ready for that time, because there's no other time like that in an athlete's life. And that's why we're so passionate about our company, the Moffitt method, because, you can have short-term development or you can have a long-term development. And the 5 or 6 years that a young man experiences between 12 and 18 or 13 and 19 years old, they only get that opportunity once, and you want them taking advantage of that and having long-term development versus short-term development. And the longer that they're involved in a strength and conditioning program, the higher the level of development will be if they're blessed with an opportunity to play at the next level. Because and there's a chart. There's a chart. It's called the Kettle Index. It actually shows you this. I could show you. I could share my screen. I don't know if you allow guests to do that, but I probably couldn't get it to work, knowing me. But there is a chart. It's called the Kettle Index that starts at 11 years old and goes to 25. And an athlete's development from 18 to 25 is nothing compared to what takes place between 13 and 18. So you need to make sure that you've got something planned for those young men and women, because you have to take advantage of it. You have to.
Is 13 years old too early to incorporate a 1 rep max for your squat?
Yeah.
Press? Okay.
Yeah.
Clear on that.
Again, because even, there are 16 and 17-year-olds that a 1 rep max, absolute strength, like 1 rep max, I would be cautious. If you're underdeveloped, part of our responsibility is to do no harm,
right.
And
protect the athletes from themselves.
Excuse me?
Protect the athletes from themselves sometimes.
Yeah. And so, young athletes are not smaller versions of mature adults. So,
Right.
But you could, like, for instance, at Catholic High School, where my boys all went to school, a max to them is 3 reps. Like if you ask my son that just finished up his eligibility this year, he's a senior at Catholic High. If you ask him what his max was in squat, he would give you a number. He would say, I don't know what it is. Let's say it's 425 pounds, back squat max. That's his 3 rep max. If you ask him, now they'll do some 1RMs and cleans, but technique is a limiting factor. So when your technique breaks down, they shut you down. So it wouldn't be like a true, unless your technique is really sound. But a 3 rep max, a max, whether it's bench or squat or deadlift or some other strength movement, it's going to be a 3 rep max. So you wouldn't want to max a 13-year-old, not in a 1. I wouldn't.
Right. And that's
There's a
easy
lot
information to
more
find too. When you look
Excuse
at,
me?
I said that's easy information to find and get to understand is the relative intensity of what a 3 rep max is compared to a 1 rep max.
Yeah.
And like you said, it keeps the athletes safe, which is, as you said, job number 1, right?
Yeah.
Keep them functional, keep them available.
Keep them on the field.
Absolutely.
Keep them on the court. They don't do any good sitting on the bench, Band-Aids on.
Right, right. Some of the things that I think the younger kids should test, push-ups, pull-ups, I think those kind of things, being able to move your own body before you start pushing around some serious weights, very important for me, especially when you start talking about our linemen.
Yeah, body weight over external resistance anytime. And again, that's like you can take a broomstick and have a young man squat that 4 sets of 10, and he's going to be pausing between reps on that last set, shaking his legs out, especially if that young man is a big kid.
Right.
Like when Austin Deculus was 13, he probably weighed 250 pounds. And so Austin Deculus, if you gave him a pole vault, because when I was a high school coach, we had some real good pole vaulters when I was a high school coach, or had previously had some real good pole vaulters. So we had all these pole vault poles and just stuffed everywhere on campus. And I would cut those up and use those to teach our exercises. That way I didn't have to go buy PVC pipe, because we had, they ain't no telling how many pole vault poles we had. They were everywhere. So I used those to teach the technique. And you have a young man or a young lady that's 13 years old, do 4 sets of 10 squats with that, deep squats, down in the bucket. They're going to be shaking their legs out. They'll feel that a little bit, and that's good for them.
Absolutely. You've had a very decorated career. You've put a lot of guys in positions that they're in now at very successful places that have had ties to you. And a lot of people look at you as one of the best of all time, champion. There's got to be some dark moments, man. There's got to be some dark space in there where you've had a struggle, difficult times. What is something in your career that you really had to see what you're made of and get yourself together and get back at it?
Yeah, every time we lost. Every time. I can't think of anything that was worse than losing. Especially when you're at a place like Tennessee or Miami or LSU or even John Curtis for that matter.
Yeah, they had a heck of a run.
Yeah, they beat it. We were ranked number 1 this year, Catholic High. When I say we, I mean Catholic High. We were ranked number 1 all season long. And they beat us in the semifinals at home here in Baton Rouge, and then went on to win the state championship. So, it doesn't matter where you're at. Losing to me, professionally, and my family will tell you, I'm a terrible loser. Terrible, 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 terrible loser. I hate losing more than I love winning. Can't. So you're supposed to win. I wasn't taught to lose growing up. I wasn't taught to, I wasn't like losing wasn't even an option as a kid growing up. And I wrestled too. That was my favorite sport growing up, was wrestling. And so if you lost in wrestling, that was, who you going to blame it on? My coach, it's my coach's fault, or it was the guy that wrestled 126. It's his fault. No, it's my fault. So I wasn't very good about that. It stinks. And worse than losing was always losing to someone that you were supposed to beat, clear and simple.
Right.
That was even worse because you just had to screw that up. We never lost to a team that we were supposed to beat and played well. And I never lost to a guy I was supposed to beat and wrestled well. That's clear cut as it can be. And then sometimes even more frustrating, and you coached on teams, you've been on teams like this where you did everything that you were supposed to do, and then you still got beat. You know, you just got beat by a better team. You know, there's nothing more, nothing harder to get over where you just weren't good enough. You didn't work hard enough. You didn't recruit well enough. You didn't put them in position to be successful. And that stinks. So, you know, I've had, and this is a funny story, and I'm not making light of this at all, but I was diagnosed with cancer in the fall of 2009. And I chose to finish the season. And with my doctor's consent, I chose to finish. I was diagnosed the fourth or fifth game of the season, and I chose to finish the season and have surgery the day after our bowl game. And so I think I had surgery on January 5th and started, you know, my recovery. But after the week I found out, we got beat by Ole Miss. And that's something that doesn't happen at LSU. And after the locker room, I was, you know, in my locker with my head down. It was a humiliating loss. And I felt somebody pat me on the back, and I looked up, and it was one of our team doctors. And he said, "You're going to be okay." And I looked at him, and he saw a puzzled look on my face. And he goes, "You've got great doctors. You know, your cancer is very curable. Your 20-year survival rate is all this." And I looked at him. I says, "Doc, you can cure cancer, but a loss to Ole Miss is in the books forever."
Wow.
And that's the way I honestly felt about it, you know. And I'm not making light of being a cancer survivor either. I was the scaredest I've ever been in my life. But losing, I just hated losing, man. Hated.
You know, we mentioned some of those the Jocko books earlier, and there's another guy, David Goggins. I don't know if you read any of his stuff. Man, just, you know,
toughest man in the world.
Not a struggle I've had to deal with, but you always wonder, man, what kind of fortitude would you have in a situation like that? You know, what kind of grit would you have to want to keep going, to set an example for those kids, your own kids, and the kids that you work with? You wonder that. I don't hope it, you know, that's obviously not something I want, but if that comes up, I hope I can answer the bell, just like you did.
So the morning, not to regress here, but the morning that my wife carried me to the hospital for surgery. We were driving, you know, because I had plenty of time to prepare for it mentally, you know, and I knew I had a great doctor. And I'd sought out, you know, a lot of advice from people that had been in a similar situation as me and friends, etc. But my wife, we're driving to the hospital. It's like 5 o'clock in the morning. And she goes, "What are you thinking about?" I was looking out the window. She goes, what are you thinking about? And I said, "Nothing. I'm good." She goes, "How do you feel?" I said, "Honestly?" She goes, "Yeah." I said, "I feel like I'm being carried in the wings of an angel." And I really felt that way. I was so confident. I was confident, number one, in myself. I was confident in my doctor. I was confident in my family, my friends, my loved ones. And then I knew that I had come to grips with my own mortality. That's something that was the most sobering aspect of it. Although my cancer wasn't that bad and I wasn't that sick, I knew that there was a possibility at some point I could die from this disease. And you come to grips again with your own mortality and your maker. People get real religious when they get cancer. And I was good. I mean, I was good. And I'm still good. You know, it could come back any day. But that's just something that you have to live with. It's just like getting fired, man. You got to, you know, if they give you lemons, you got to make lemonade. Ain't a whole lot you can do about it. So what? Now what? You know, what's next?
That's on our wall. in our athletic facility. So what now? What?
Yeah. So what now? What? I mean, it's not going to do you any good to cry about it, you know.
Right.
So
next man up.
Yeah. Next,
fill the void.
Peel yourself up off the ground. And go to work.
Right. When you are retired, all the way retired, out of strength and conditioning, you know, and just kind of watching everything around you, and these guys come back and they talk to maybe a colleague or they talk about you on your behalf, all the players that you've impacted, what would you want them to say about you?
That I cared. Number one, I cared more about them as an individual than I did winning. That's the most important part. And I'm sincere when I say as much as I hate to lose, you know, we were in the service industry and I was there for them. It was my responsibility to do all that I could do to make sure that they were the very best that they could be. And I tried to deal with every person and treat them as if they were my own. I loved every one of them and treated them. I was fair. I was honest. It didn't matter if you were our very best player. It didn't matter if you were Joe Burrow or a seventh team walk-on quarterback. You were going to be treated the same. It didn't matter if you were Jordan Jefferson, Ricky Jefferson, or Justin Jefferson. I treated all three of those young men the same. And that's why we were able to get all three of them, was because their parents knew that. And it goes on and on and on. There would have never been a Justin Jefferson if there hadn't been a Jordan and a Ricky. And so that's the main thing. I cared about them as people, and I treated them as human beings and not some piece of meat. And I was always honest and fair with them. Simple.
Cared, right? How you spell love? Time?
Yeah.
Care.
Yeah.
All right, we're getting down to the last segment. You ready, Coach?
Yeah.
You're a strength guy. I'm looking forward to this 4th and 4 part.
Yeah.
I'm glad you agreed to do it. All right, 2 minutes left on the clock. You got no timeouts. You're down 5 on the 50. 4th and 4. What's your thought process, personnel, formation, play?
Yeah, so first thing, I'm going to think players, not plays, okay? Number one, always think players. So now, it depends on – now, all of this would have been worked out beforehand, but I don't want to score too soon. I've lost some big games like this. When you score too soon, 2 minutes is plenty of time if you're on the 50. So it has a lot to do with what we've done on offense for the last 13 minutes. And if we've been successful running the football and we got to where we're that place, we're on the 50 with 2 minutes left and we've been running the ball and blocking them, I'm going to line up in 11 personnel and I'm going to run the ball right down their throat. Okay? That's the strength coach in me.
Yes.
You know, we're going to impose our will on them. And you know what? In every big game that boiled down to this scenario, 9 times out of 10 was won by running the football and imposing your will. And that's cliche in some circles. But then now, if we haven't run the ball well, I'm going to go with a 4 or 5 receiver set. Hopefully we got some receivers. Hopefully I had a timeout, all right? And I had them over on the sidelines. And I'm going to tell them where the sticks – every coach has got to make sure that every position group knows where the sticks are. And I'm going to throw it up and let one of my receivers, my best receiver, I'm going to give it to my best running back, or I'm going to throw it to our very, very best receiver. And then lastly, I would do a combination that I have a run pass option and make sure, especially if I had a quarterback that could make people miss, I'm going to have a run pass option. So first, run the ball. Second, and I'm not going to give you just one because it all has to do with the situation, you know,
the feel of the game. The feel of the game.
Yeah.
Man, I like it. Line it up, run it down their throat.
Yeah.
You know, that's what you get paid the big bucks for. Get those guys ready to do that.
Yeah, run it right down their throat. You got to be patient, you know, make sure you don't score too soon. Impose your will, drive the ball, you know, because if you're running it, you know, there's less chance you turn the ball over and lose the game. Can't afford a turnover. But if you got guys like Terrace Marshall, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Thad Moss, and a running back like Clyde Edwards-Helaire, that you could either throw it to him in the backfield or you could split him out. It didn't matter. You know, I'd probably throw the ball and let one of those guys miss them and run down and score, and then get out there and kick it off to them and run down there, pin them deep, and play defense, you know. So
great answer. And my job is done. I got you pounding your fist, getting the blood flowing a little bit.
Yeah, fired up.
Coach, this has been a pleasure. Tell listeners how to find you on social media or anything else you want to talk about with your podcast.
Okay, perfect. So Twitter and Instagram is simple. It's Tommy Moffitt, at Tommy Moffitt on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, etc. Our company name is The Moffitt Method. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, The Moffitt Method. Or our podcast is called The Moffitt Method Podcast, and it's on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, you name it. It's on every platform out there. And please, if you go to tune into the podcast, man, it's a blast. Every week is either a college or high school strength coach, and not just some clinic talking guy either. I mean, next week's high school coach is unbelievable. This week's guest is LSU strength coach, Jake Flint. I've got the guy that took over for me after I left. He's this week's guest. So tune into the podcast, subscribe it, leave a review, and please share it. Please share this podcast. If you're listening to this podcast today, do Donald a favor and share his podcast, share our podcast, share it to all your friends. And if you don't have friends, just send it randomly to whoever you come across, right?
That's it.
Thank you.
Coach.
Thanks for having me on.
Yes, sir. You can find me on Twitter at Coach Lawrence FB, as in football. Search 4th and 4 podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon, and YouTube. It's been a pleasure. I'm going to take a screenshot.